When the Legends Die, Chapter 7. It was a long winter. Some days his snares had no rabbits and they went hungry. Each day she told him the old tales and sang with him the old songs. He watched how she wove baskets, since her hands must be busy, and he learned those things she knew. Each day he strung an old bow of his father's and drew the bowstring as far as he could. Each day he could draw it a little farther. His arms grew strong. When there were leaves on the aspens again, he could draw one of his father's arrows almost to the point. Then the deer came back up the valleys, and he made his first big meat. He killed a deer with his father's arrows. The meat was tough and stringy, the fat and juice sucked out of it by the winter, but it was food. It was meat. She said, "Soon you will know a name for yourself." He said, "This morning, before I made meat, I met a she-bear, and she was not afraid of me. I was not afraid of her. We talked to each other. Then I killed the deer, and I left a part of the meat for that she-bear. I shall call myself Bear's brother. That is a good name." And that was his name. They sang the songs for finding a name. They dried berries, they smoked fish, they made meat. Summer passed like a white cloud drifting over the mountain. One day, when she was cutting wood for a cooking fire, the axe caught in a knot, and she tried to drive it loose, using a stone for a hammer. The axe head broke through the eye, and there was no way to use it except as a fist axe. She knew they could not cut firewood for the winter with a fist axe. She looked around the lodge, and she said to the boy, "We must go to Pagosa. We must have a new axe." Then she said, "They cannot want him now for killing Frank No Deer." So she took two of her best baskets, and they went down to the road from Piedratown to Pagosa. But she did not go to Pagosa by the road. She was not sure what she had told the boy was true. Maybe they still did want her man. She was tempted to go back, do without a new axe. They camped there beside the road, on the slope where no one could see them, for 2 days. Then she knew she had to go on. They kept to the hills, to the game trails, and they went to Pagosa. But when they came to the last hill and saw Pagosa there in the valley, she was tempted to go back again, back to the lodge. They spent the night on that last hill, in the brush, and she knew she had to go on. The next morning they went down to Pagosa and along the street to Jim Thatcher's store. People turned to look at them because they wore the clothes she had made from deerskins. But nobody stopped them. Nobody said, "Where's your man? We want your man because he killed Frank No Deer." They went to the store, and Jim Thatcher was there behind the counter. Jim Thatcher was a tall, thin man who had been in that store many years, and his father there before him. He knew Indians. He traded with Indians for robes and leather work and baskets. He traded salt and sugar and knives and axes and tin cans of beans for those things the Indians had made. He sold those things to people who liked robes and baskets, and sometimes he sold them to other traders. They went to Jim Thatcher's store, and she set the 2 baskets on the counter. Jim Thatcher looked at the baskets, and he looked at her, and then he said, "You want to trade these?" She said, "How much?" Jim Thatcher looked at her again, and he looked at the boy. He said, "You used to live here, didn't you?" She shook her head, made the sign that she did not understand, and asked again, "How much?" "Do you want cash or trade?" he asked. She looked around the store, went over to the rack of axes and chose one. She laid it on the counter beside the baskets. She went to the shelf of rifle ammunition, chose a box that would fit the rifle. She put it beside the axe. She beckoned to the boy, and together they looked about the store. His eyes were all eagerness and careful excitement. They looked at the clothing, the work gloves, the shoes. He stopped at a case with hunting knives in it. He stared at a knife in the case. Then he turned away and looked at granite cooking kettles, and at calico for skirts, and at blue denim overalls. She asked what he would like. He said in the tongue, "There is nothing," but his eyes went back to the case of hunting knives. Jim Thatcher saw this. He went to the case and took out a knife, laid it on the counter. "How do you like this one?" he asked. They came back and looked at that knife. The boy closed his eyes and turned away. He said to his mother, again in the tongue, "There is nothing." She turned to Jim Thatcher and said, "Candy," and nodded toward the boy. Jim Thatcher filled a small bag with chocolate drops and red and yellow hard candies and set it on the counter with the axe and the ammunition. He started to put the knife back in the case, but she made a quick gesture. She wanted the knife for the boy. Jim Thatcher mentally added up the price. $2 for the axe, $1 for the ammunition, $1.50 for the knife, a nickel for the candy, $4.55. He glanced at the baskets. Good work, some of the best oot basket work he had ever seen. If somebody came along who knew baskets, he might get $4 or $5 apiece for them. Even Mike Lawson would give him 3.50 apiece. He put the knife back on the counter with the other things, and she nodded, apparently satisfied. He asked, "Where is your man?" She looked at him, a flash of fear in her eyes. Then she shook her head, shrugged, made the sign of not understanding. "I remember you," he said. "Your man is George Blackpool." She wouldn't admit it. She put the ammunition, the knife, and the candy in her pack, picked up the axe, motioned to the boy, and started to leave. Jim Thatcher stopped her before she reached the door. "There's no need to run," he said. "They don't want your man. He doesn't have to hide out. The case is all cleared up. Self-defense, they called it. Do you understand?" She looked at him bewildered. "Your man can come back," Jim Thatcher said. "He doesn't have to hide out. This thing is all over, finished." He made the gesture with his hands for wiping clean, making an end. She stared at him. "You understand English, don't you? Of course you do." She didn't answer. She stared at him, searching his face. "Tell George he can come back. They're not looking for him anymore. Tell him." She shook her head. "Why not?" She spoke to the boy at Oot, and they left the store. They walked down the street. People stared at them, smiled at their clothes, but nobody spoke to them. Nobody tried to stop them. They walked down the street to the end and started along the road to Piedra Town. They went away down the road, and she stopped and looked back. Nobody was following them, but she was not sure. It could have been a trick, that what Jim Thatcher had said about her man, and even if they did not want her man, now that he was dead, maybe they wanted her or the boy. She walked down the road until they had passed the bend, and Pagosa was out of sight. There she and the boy left the road, walking carefully on stones to leave no track. They went up the hillside, through the brush, and there they sat, hidden, watching, for an hour. Nobody came following them. She opened the pack and got out the bag of candy. They ate the chocolate drops. Then they went on, following the trails through the brush.